Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first Open Referral UK online session for everybody. We've invited a few members of councils from some other bodies as well. And this is about the virtues of Open Referral UK, its benefits and how it can be implemented within local governments. We have an agenda where we're going to have a number of speakers. Emily Sullivan is going to talk about data matters and provide a bit of context. Ben Unsworth is going to talk about the impact of poor data on communities, and we'll also introduce the Open Referral UK standard. This is going to be followed by a case study from Vicky Tomlinson from Lancashire County Council, and then it's Q&A from the project team itself. And there'll also be opportunities for people to ask questions after each of the presentations, and also there'll be a feedback survey at the end of this session as well, and please ask you to complete that as well. Without ado, if Emily's with us, I'll move on to Emily. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Emily Sullivan. I am Head of Product at the Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government. So we're working in the local digital team to think about how we might be able to better support councils on their digital transformation journey, and data standards are a really key part of that. Next slide, please. So within local digital, we've done a number of projects. Some of you will have known about the Local Digital Fund, which really highlighted a number of projects that focused on data standards and data transformation as being really key foundational element for digital transformation, but also that key the key message being that actually to provide local services, we need data, to turn data into information that's available at the right time, to the right organisation, to the right practitioner that's trying to provide a service, but also to provide those insights at a higher level, and that providing data standards is really key to all of those things. That there's some real opportunities that we've identified through some of our research. So one of them kind of shown there is in relation to the blockers to scaling and transforming services, where data standards are really key in that, and that councils hold an extensive amount of data that is often not linked even internally within one organisation, let alone across the wider public sector and local place-based services that are trying to provide end-to-end services for residents. So some of the challenges here are around data for silos, inefficient legacy tech, but we reckon that data standards will help unlock some of this. Next slide, please. So inconsistent data is a massive problem. I'm sure that many people understand the duplication of effort that we have, where data needs to be entered into multiple systems so that people can have access to it. That people are asking residents the same questions time and time again because that information isn't effectively shared, or the right questions aren't asked at the right time, and the lack of opportunity for insight to be gained from that data because it's not structured in the right way, or that we've got incompatible data formats or technology where we can't pass that information effectively. That there are a number of manual workarounds that people try to use and implement to try and avoid some of that, which I think is which leads to great deals of inefficiency within organisations. And we have that kind of fragmented data systems across local government, which really doesn't help with the way that we look at data most effectively. So there are some real kind of key difficulties in managing complex needs, which are provided by multiple services within local government or across the wider public sector, where we know that kind of housing services, social care services, and wider public services being in place to try and support an individual and not effectively data sharing, which one example we have from housing is the tragic and avoidable loss of Awabi Shack due to mould exposure, where the information was input into the system at different points but never aggregated, so no one had that kind of clear view of the circumstances that somebody was living in, and that those are the sorts of things that we think that data standards can transform. in relation to outcomes. Next slide, please. So the key value of data standards. So data standards are agreed upon conventions or formats that define how data should be structured, recorded and exchanged. So that would ensure that data from different systems, different organisations, different departments, different services can be understood, compared and used consistently. So we believe that data standards will enhance data quality, improve data accuracy, support interoperability, and that these are real key benefits to local government in terms of having the right information at the right time to make the right decisions to improve outcomes for residents. In relation to these kind of three key values, so efficiency, collaboration and better outcomes. So efficiency, so that standards reduce the need for manual data reconciliation, reducing that duplication of entry that we've identified across multiple systems and services, and it also leads to efficiency in providing services to residents, because you would have the right information to be able to inform the right service provision earlier. Collaboration, so multiple agencies such as health, housing, social services can work together more effectively with standardised data, sharing that information in a real-time way, so that you've got that single view of a resident or service user in relation to all of those interactions that might be happening through that user journey, and leading to better outcomes. Where data is accurate and interoperable, it leads to quicker and better decision making, improving outcomes for residents. So we've got the work that iStand have been doing in relation to Savvy, identifying some of those vulnerability data standards across departments, so that we've got the right information in the right place at the right time to be able to provide those earlier interventions to improve outcomes, efficiency and collaboration across the board. So transforming the housing sector through improved data, building on previous early research on scaling standards, we took an approach that and applied it to a service that was in MHCLG's policy ownership, looking at the housing standards, found out that the data inefficiencies were costing £400 million per annum for just housing allocations and responsive repairs alone. The objective is to realise a single view of the property and the tenant, enabling timely interventions and better outcomes. The approach is to obtain an agreed taxonomy, API, and agreed import-export rules so that we can share that data more effectively. The team are now in a phase seeking to find a long-term ownership model for the standards, which is really key to make sure that we've got that sustainability there for people adopting that standard and suppliers engaging as well, to make sure that we've got that kind of clear view of what happens next. Building a community of suppliers and providers to advocate for that change and promote adoption, prioritise and develop the standards that we think will realise the biggest benefits, co-creating and developing those data standards and defining the value case for change so that people really do understand why adoption will help. So the impact of data standards in social housing. So standardisation addresses issues like safety compliance, like for example, fire safety, repairs and tenant engagement, improving housing management and service delivery through standardised data formats. So data standards play a key role in driving digital transformation in the housing sector and ensuring a holistic view of tenants' needs. Another standard that we've funded and continue to do so is Savvy. So that's the scalable approach to vulnerability via interoperability, which iStand are leading on for us. But it's an initiative aimed at improving how local government identify and support vulnerable individuals through the better use of data. So we're looking to find a nationally consistent data standard that can be adopted to think about all of the different types of vulnerability, which allows and the indicators of vulnerability that allows different organisations to work together more effectively. So vulnerability data is spread across multiple systems: social care, housing, health services. We've got a mix of central government, local government, districts, county councils. Currently, each department or agency might collect, store and interpret this data differently, making it difficult to collaborate and share insights, and not necessarily really truly understanding the value of that data to another organisation who might be working with that individual. So Savvy aims to introduce data standards to ensure that key information about vulnerable individuals is consistently recorded and shared. So enabling multi-agency collaboration. So that approach to interoperability allows data sharing between different departments, central government, local government, different providers of health, making sure that they've got the key information at hand to make the best decisions to lead to the best outcomes. So, for example, a person flagged at risk of homelessness could have their data shared securely across housing services, social care and mental health teams, allowing a coordinated multi-agency response, and that these standards can help organisations work better together, providing more timely and holistic support for vulnerable individuals. The key benefits of Savvy's approach will be that earlier identification of vulnerability, standardising that data and sharing it more effectively. So you can have an individual struggling with rent payments, for example, might be flagged before becoming homeless, allowing services to offer assistance early rather than when it might be too late or outcomes might be worsened. Efficiency reduces the duplication of effort, allows data to be shared in a more uniform way, that data doesn't need to be collected several times, that the resident doesn't need to necessarily be asked that information that might be held elsewhere in government or local government, and having that data driven decision making, so that we've got that kind of high quality standardized data which absolutely gives the right people the right information at the right time to be able to allocate the right resources and take forward the right interventions. So driving adoption of ORUK forward, what we're here to talk about today. So this is a standard for sharing local service information across health, social care and community services. The aim of ORUK is to improve referrals by enabling services, for example, housing or health, to share accurate, consistent data on all of the available resources so that people can find the right services that they need far easier in a more consistent way. So with the impact of reducing service duplication, making it faster and easier for residents to find and access the services they need. So together, our approach to standards more generally relation to this kind of social housing standards, Savvy's vulnerability framework and ORUK's service directory standards represent a comprehensive approach to improving data management in local government. We understand that these aren't the only standards that we need, and that they're really thinking about what else we might need to do, but really want to push the work that we're doing in these areas to realise those key benefits of having this kind of unified and connected approach to standard development, and creating a more interconnected, efficient and responsive public service infrastructure. I mean, the vision of all of this is that actually we can just collect the data once and use it many times where it's needed, and people can have access to it when they need it. So we can have better service delivery, improved decision making, and better collaboration and efficiency, kind of using those standards to foster that multi-agency collaboration, which is absolutely key when we're talking about local place-based services. So that final takeaway from me is that unified data standards are no longer optional. As services become increasingly interconnected, they're absolutely essential for delivering modern local government operations, and that provide those foundations for innovative digital transformation and the kind of emergence of AI, that actually these data standards are going to allow us to provide a consistent approach to the way that we that we digitally transform our services, but also how we might be able to best support residents no matter where they live across the country. So we want to make sure that those services deliver efficiently, residents are supported effectively, and resources are used wisely, and that we think that we truly believe that the future of local government is going to rely on embracing these frameworks to create a data-driven, interoperable and resilient public service system. Any questions?
Hi, Sheldon, your microphone's off.
Oh, sorry. Questions, family, and also if you want to get involved with our wider data standards work, there's a link at the bottom there, which we'll send around again in the chat. Peter, fire away.
I stuck it in the chat as well, but vulnerability is quite a subjective subject. So when you're dealing with adult social care or NHS or providers as well, I often found that it was very liquid, and the way that people tried to define what vulnerability was. So I just wondered how the standards are going to work on that, or how the framework will deal with it.
So there are lots of research has been done into the different indicators of vulnerability, and that some of that can be distilled into discrete data sets that, when combined, give a better picture of what vulnerabilities might be impacting a child or an adult or a resident of services. As you say, it's not an exact science. There are some things that might not be able to be easily captured through data, but where we have some of those kind of indicators of rural child poverty, for example, that there's been lots of research done in certain kind of areas of vulnerability that really does lead itself to being able to be standardized in such a way, not saying that no one will fall through the gaps, but actually that there are some ways that we can look to standardize those data sets, and just to provide an indication of where some of that earlier intervention might be needed.
Thanks, Peter. But after that question, we've got time for more questions at the back of this set of presentations, but I want to move on now and bring on Ben Unsworth, who is a project director of TPX, but is working quite closely with us on this data standards work and also on Open Referral UK. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Sheldon, and thank you, Emily. It's really helpful to set all of this in the kind of wider context of data standards and the work that's going on across government. So yeah, hi, I'm Ben. So I'm just going to talk you through, I guess, a little bit of a brief history of ORUK and kind of how we've got to where we are now, what the work is that we're doing. And I'll warn you now, there'll be a tiny bit of audience participation as we kind of go through, but it won't be too stressful, I promise. As you've been doing already, please keep the questions coming in the chat. It's really, really helpful to get people's observations and questions as we move through. So kind of going back to the origins of this, that there was a set of underlying problems that we were keen to solve, and we being a kind of collective group of councils a few years ago, carried out some discovery work that was funded by the MHCLG Local Digital Fund. And we were all experiencing, I was working in the council at the time, we were all experiencing similar problems around directories of services, of which most councils had more than one, often up to as many as kind of a dozen. And the products weren't great. They weren't working very well for our residents, and they weren't really supporting staff in the way that we had hoped either. And although the temptation at the time was to kind of build a better directory product, because people like me like making things on the internet, what we realized was actually that was more of a symptom and probably not the root cause. And we needed to do a little bit of work to kind of dig into what it was about these products that was causing them to not have the success we had hoped. So sitting under all of this, the big reason why, I guess, why does this data exist? Why do we try to collect it together into products like service directories, or quite often printouts of leaflets in people's bags? It's because we want to help people make good, informed choices and access the support they need kind of at the right time, and as much as possible do this themselves, but also to support frontline colleagues in making those good, quick referrals to the most appropriate services right at that kind of point of need. And our hypothesis, I guess, was that the data that we hold in places can really help kind of support this through some really well-designed kind of digital services. And ultimately, if we get this right, we're going to have a huge impact on people's kind of health and well-being, their daily lives. We're going to connect them with that kind of care and support right when they need it, and also take away a lot of the burden that falls on quite often families or carers to help people navigate what can be quite complex kind of networks of local services with different eligibility thresholds and different kind of routes through to access. And we also saw in the research that there was a fairly sizable kind of opportunity here around just helping improve the way that the public sector as a whole, kind of across places, manage and prioritize the different types of referral processes that happen within and across organizations. So these are things like information, advice and guidance in adult services, family information services, family hubs, SEND, so special education needs and disability services, social prescribing happening across the NHS. And cross-system working, it's not always possible to get all of those incentives lined up perfectly, and to kind of perfectly design every possible kind of configuration of how this might work across the many different organizations and geographies that we do this in. But that perhaps by making the data better, so better curated, more trustworthy, and easier to kind of flow within organizations and between organizations, that we might be able to kind of support people in configuring the services, both digital and in person, in the way that works in those places. And data standards, as you're probably gathering here, we think have a really, really important role to play in making that happen. So just very quickly going to walk you through, just in case there's anyone thinking, well, yeah, what do you actually mean here, Ben? So these are some 4 examples from some of the services that we worked with and spoke to through the different phases of this work. So these are kind of like very, very high level theories of change, I guess. So within adult social care, we know we want to keep people independent, keep them healthy and in their own homes for as long as possible, and wrapping kind of appropriate community support services around them, and supporting self-funders to use their money wisely as well. This was something we saw in the research, was people depleting their funds too quickly and ending up having to come in and get more kind of care and support from the public sector. So here we think better data helps people make more informed choices, and that happens both through kind of digital services, but also the kind of in-person kind of relational services across a place. We spoke to housing and homelessness organisations and councils, kind of temporary accommodation and emergency housing teams, and heard time and time again that the timeliness of intervention and signposting and advice and catching someone right at that moment of need and getting them access to a critical service is really important in avoiding these kind of long-term problems that people might encounter, and that quite often, particularly with rough sleeping, we saw that it really wasn't confined to a single like local authority geography. So particularly in places like London, Manchester, we have lots of overlapping kind of, boundaries where people cross over, people move around, and services that are appropriate might be provided just over a border somewhere. And if that data is only kind of described in a single place, that makes it very, very difficult to know that somebody can access a service that might just be a kind of stone's throw away. So making sure that that's accurate and trustworthy, that workers can really rely on it, was an important piece of work. And social prescribing, I think we're going to hear a little bit about this later on, but again, when we spoke to colleagues working across the NHS and in kind of local health and care teams, we saw that having this really good high quality data about community-based services was a bit of a missing puzzle piece. So, you know, folks were building their own spreadsheets, their own access databases. We had multiple kind of directory of service products online. We had physical ring binders of, you know, leaflets, printouts, photographs of community buildings with opening times. People very creatively like building their own kind of networks and sets of information. But far from ideal in terms of really getting the value out of the data that we collectively hold. And then again, working and speaking with colleagues across the kind of employment and skills sectors and folks in DWP. Again, we see quite often the kind of, you know, the individual organization's responsibility and response. So in this case, you know, people like work coaches getting people back into employment were quite often confronted with issues that they were perhaps not best placed to immediately solve. And people would often present with you know, things like mental health problems, family issues, you know, housing crisis. You know, there's lots of things that obviously make up a person, and when they present to any one bit of the public sector, they need other problems to be kind of solved as well. So the more we can help this kind of networks of our colleagues operating in communities to know at their fingertips, who can I refer to? How do I do this well? You know, the better we can kind of ultimately support our citizens, our residents, our tenants, however we describe them, to get that kind of support right in that moment of time. So this is I did pre-warn you, so get ready with fingers in the chat, and if you wanted to raise a hand, I would love to know just very, very quickly, what's your experience of what happens in communities when service information is hard to find? So I've given a few examples from the research. I'm guessing there's a reason you came along today, unless some of you will be like me and you're just kind of into data standards for the sake of data standards. But I'd love to know from a kind of service perspective, end user perspective, and or from a kind of technology IT data perspective, you know, what's the problem that you're seeing? Why are you kind of interested in this? And what might you want to kind of solve? Do get your hands up, ideas in the chat. I'm going to give you one example. So a quote from a support worker in a carers charity that we spent some time with. And this kind of relates, I guess, to that comment I made about people finding their own ways to collect this data. We had these kind of sometimes physical. In this case, somebody described it as kind of database in their mind. They were effectively remembering, you know, all of the local services that they might refer people to, which is fab, but memories can only hold so much, and the data changes quite frequently. Would anyone like to volunteer any observations on what happens in communities when service information is hard to find? Thank you, Sally. And Liz as well. Brilliant. Oh, hi, Liz. I know Liz. Hello. Yeah, organizations having their own directories, limited trust. Trust in data is a really big one. You know, if I am going to use data in my organization and I'm relying on it coming from somebody else, how do I know that that is correct? What do I know about their processes for keeping that stuff up to date, etc., etc.? So not wholly solved by standards, but we think standards is definitely a part of the puzzle. Liz is sharing some great information there about parents and carers not being able to find information and creating their own websites, applications to start compiling data online, which again, like that community activism is great, but having third parties becoming in some way a kind of trusted resource is risky, right? Like this, you know, it's no mean feat, like collating and curating and structuring data about services in a place. And it kind of breaks that link, I guess, with the public sector and some of the statutory responsibilities we have to direct people to the right organizations. Fab. Thank you so much, folks. If other things come to mind while I'm talking, please do pop them down in the chat and we can circle back round. So the standard itself. So we avoided falling into the trap of creating another data standard. And when we were doing the work, we spoke to colleagues in the United States who had kind of built and developed an international data standard called Open Referral. And very short version, we created a UK version of this, and we worked very closely with our colleagues in the international standard. And there's work going on to create what we describe as profiles, basically versions of the standard that work in different countries and different geographies. So we've got our own kind of special way of describing data in the UK context. And it's an open data standard. And Emily described a little bit about open data standards and what they are and why they matter. You know, this is essentially a way of making, through kind of agreements, reusable agreements, data that's easier to publish, so that people can access it, share it, and have, you know, better quality data, more trust in that data. That can happen at a like individual piece of data level. So a good example would be date and time. So I'm sure you've, like me, anytime you see something in the United States or have a conversation with an American about a time and date, they put things the wrong way around. And that's not just you know, an opinion. That's because it doesn't conform to the international standard on how you describe times and dates. You know, there's a right way of doing it. And that's important because it avoids confusion, stops computers getting confused when you input the wrong dates, and so on. More complex example, this might be something you've seen in your day-to-day lives. If you try to make a payment now to a new payee through your online banking, you will likely be prompted to say, hang on a minute, that name doesn't quite look like the name we have for this account. And that's because there is now a standard through which banks can transfer this data and talk to each other effectively. So when I try to make a payment, that the two different bank services are able to have a quick chat and say, hold on a minute, something's not quite right there, are you sure? And in that case, really good example of how data standards can help reduce fraud and error through and support consumers in this case in making really good choices. So some kind of analogous examples out in other bits of the world. And that's effectively what we're trying to do with our community services data here. So we want consistent ways of describing and publishing this data so that we can have all of those benefits that I talked about a little earlier on. Taking a breath. So the good news, our data standard, Open Referral UK, is an approved open standard for government. So we have, over the last few years, done an awful lot of work. Lots of people have been involved and supported this through the process of kind of understanding user needs, designing and developing a standard, documenting it really well, and taking it through a pretty rigorous process with our colleagues in Cabinet Office. So that the Open Standards Board were able and confident enough to say, this is now an official data standard, it is government endorsed, and you should use it. That's a should, it's not mandated, but it's a very strong suggestion that this standard is here and it would make a great deal of sense to use it. And the work we're trying to do now through events like today is to raise awareness, help people understand the importance of using standards, and to try and understand what might be getting in the way for folks of taking that kind of next step to implement. And to help make that possible, you know, we've fundamentally kept it as quite a simple data standard. You know, if you're describing in the right way an organization, so the name of an organization and the services that it provides or service, you'll be able to kind of provide data that is compliant with that data standard. Now, there's some more technical underpinnings that you get into kind of how that needs to be described in a way that other computers can kind of read it and understand it. But at its heart, it is a relatively simple one. But it is also very interoperable, extensible. It plays nicely with other things. So we heard about Savvy earlier. I saw folks in the chat talking about 360 giving, open contracting. You can make this work with other types of data standard, other ways of describing the data that might flow through this so that it can be kind of augmented and added to and made even more powerful and useful and usable in the many and various different contexts that this will potentially be used. And you can see some of the other types of data that's typically also included alongside a service. So once you've got a service, it tends to happen in a place. It tends to have a presence on the internet. It will have some people maybe that work there or volunteer there, and so on and so forth. And then, and I've taken this from our colleagues in Buckinghamshire, then what you tend to see is the data can then be surfaced in all sorts of useful and interesting ways. So we have things that citizens themselves can interact with. So things like service directories or bringing data up in context in online services. So as you're kind of browsing different websites looking for support, it might choose to surface some useful data based on what you share with it or what types of categories of information you're looking for. The reason I showed this one, not just to challenge myself to try and say philatelic in front of 62 people, but to say quite a lot of these services are very small, and thank you, and their only presence on the internet is quite often in these service directories or maybe a Facebook page, but they don't always have their own presence online. It's not always something that's going to be listed on the kind of Google search bar with really good clear contact information. But the work that teams in places like local authorities do to curate and govern and check and publish this data adds a ton of value to it. And what we want to see is that value really extend, ideally across the organization where that data is collected, so making it more usable between the different teams, but also outside of that organization, so with other organizations in a place and potentially nationally. Kind of talking about colleagues in DWP, for example, who may also have an interest in this type of data. So yeah, it can be presented then online in loads of different ways. The beauty about these data standards and the kind of infrastructure that comes with it is we also describe ways that you should create your application programming interface, your APIs, and that's something that would allow developers to then very quickly pull that data through into other contexts, whether that's tools for frontline workers or things that citizens themselves will interact with. So getting towards the end, folks. Why is it important? Quick recap. We want to see better signposting. We want that data to constantly be able to be improved so that it is reliable and trustworthy, that it can be shared across the place. There is definitely benefit in just sorting out your data within one organization, having better ways of curating it and sharing it between departments, but it becomes really valuable when you start going across sectors and across geographies and potentially even nationally as well. We know that by sorting out our data, although it is quite hard work and it takes a great deal of kind of commitment and doggedness to get it done, you can then start to reduce duplication, not just in the data, but quite often in the services that present this data out and in the processes you probably have internally for people who are all trying to do the same thing, which is like to curate and collect and govern this data, probably across multiple teams, probably in slightly different ways. So we can see savings, both some short-term ones, like just making that data work better today, but also those long-term ones. For every person we can support at a point of need and prevent from needing much more expensive or intensive care earlier than is ideal, those are some pretty big numbers you start to get in within an organization and kind of across the geography. But we know it's not super straightforward, and this is why, promise this is the last slide now, folks. So this is we hear that this stuff's hard to do. We know it's hard to do. Folks like myself have tried to do this in different organizations with different degrees of success. So awareness is one of the problems, hence events like this and blogging and telling stories and sharing good examples where people are doing this work, helping people understand some of those potential benefits, the cacheable ones, the short-term efficiency ones, but ideally getting people really excited about those big preventative opportunities that we can see across the system. And yeah, how might we work with suppliers to help drive adoption so that it takes a little bit of the pressure off people having to kind of design and build their own services or their own interventions. So kind of getting some of those big organizations who already provide a lot of software to the sector to adopt this. We can do some work to encourage them, but the more of a groundswell of demand that comes from organizations who commission their services, then the better we'll be able to kind of get past a tipping point. And working directly with other government departments. So we know our colleagues in DWP, DFE, Department of Health and Social Care all have an interest in this data, and they would love to see it working well across the system. So as quick a rapid stop tour as I could manage, I hope that was both interesting and useful. I think what we'll do in the interest of time is keep the questions coming in the chat, please, and I'll turn my attention to the chat and try and pick them up. And otherwise, I think I'm handing straight over to Victoria Tomlinson from Lancashire.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so it's really good to hear what everybody's been saying up to now, because it starts to ring true. So I'm just going to go through sort of a very brief case study just to explain our experience so far, and I do say so far because as Ben's just alluded to, it's complex, it's challenging, and it feels like every day is a little bit of a school day for us here in Lancashire as we're learning and uncovering things as we go along. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just to give a bit of context, Lancashire County Council covers quite a vast geography. It's a complex geography. We have around about 1.2 million residents across the county borders. What we also have is, alongside the County Council, we have 12 district authorities, and we also have 2 unitary authorities, one of which is sort of encircled by the County Council, and the other that is surrounded by us and the sea. So we have Blackburn and Blackpool. So we have to do quite a lot, not just on the county footprint, but alongside both our unitary colleagues and working in conjunction with our district authorities. In terms of the sort of the population, we have a real mix of people living in different areas. We have around about a third of residents living in some of the most deprived areas in England. And that does have a key impact around looking at what is the information, advice and guidance and support that we provide, and how do we provide that to our residents, because some of these, some people find it hard to access information and support, and then that also then counters back into some of our services and our teams being able to access the right information at the right time. And I think it's sort of been alluded to, but one of the things that we use as a bit of a mantra within the commissioning side, because my background is adult social care commissioning, but we do a lot of work with our business intelligence, is we only get out what we put in. So if we don't put the right quality data in the first place, what we're getting out at the other side is generally not particularly helpful. So we've looked at our services and looked at adopting the Open Referral UK data standards, because we could really see some tangible benefits to ensuring that the quality of the information that we're utilising is good quality information, and it's providing the right level of detail both to the staff within our teams, the staff within our district councils, and also residents. We've just done a little bit of a scoping exercise to look at how we have been operating prior to adopting this data standard, and to help to build a business case for where we want to go in the future. And we actually found that across the different services, across adult social care, children's social care, cultural services and growth and economic development, we had over 800 different methods of data collation, be that through different hardware, software, just Excel spreadsheets, and as Ben said before, people actually just having written lists down in teams of things that were available in their local areas. So that obviously creates a hidden cost to the authority itself for us to manage, be that in people or in software, and we've figured that figure to be around about £100,000 a year to the authority in some way, shape or form. We do know that by adopting this standard and taking this forward, that doesn't eradicate that number. We know that it just means that we're a bit more streamlined, and going back to the savvy aspect, we're a bit more savvy and cost effective in how we utilise that funding and that resource of people that we're using at the minute. So the reason that we approached, we looked at the Open Referral UK data standard, was that we wanted to undertake a unified approach to finding a sort of we call it the single version of the truth, so that the information that we're collating, we're doing that in a systematic way that then can get pushed out to the relevant services and teams to be able to provide the right intelligence to those staff to enable them to do their job. And we've been doing that hand in hand with our NHS colleagues as well. So as Ben mentioned about talking across organisations, across directorates, we're seeing that there is a benefit not just to the local authority, but also to our relationships with our health colleagues. So the principle that we've worked with is looking at how do we make it easy so that we're asking once, but we can then use that to feed multiple different either platforms or directories or different systems that need to get that information out. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, as I said, we are on the journey, so we can only really talk about the benefits so far for us. What we have got to is that we have a trusted and good relationship across our NHS and County Council authority around a unified approach to that data architecture. So what I'm talking about there is we talk about it as in the back office and the front facing elements. So the back office data architecture of how do we pull that information in and how do we start to push that out is a really strong relationship. We know we still have multiple sort of interface points at that front end that are either resident facing or team facing, and we're currently looking to start to aggregate those into more of a joined up approach, but then ensuring that we're still conscious and reflective of the different needs of either different populations or different service areas, be that mental health services or children's services, for example. We've found that also what it's starting to do for us is it's supporting a different conversation around service design, particularly around the local authorities' front doors into our services. So because this information is becoming a more widespread and readily available and enhanced through that data standard, so we're able to gain more intelligence around what's going on in our communities, particularly at present. We've now got good opportunities for better diversion of provision for people who come to adult social care and children's social care to say, actually, we may not be the best option for you at this point in time, but have you considered these services that are local to you, may be better placed to be able to provide you with what you need. And also means that, as Ben alluded to within his slides, that we're reducing that level of burden and dependency on the local authority to do everything as such. It's also improving our relationships with community organisations and other statutory organisations, some of which we didn't actually even knew existed up until starting to utilise these standards. So we're able to, from a commissioning point of view, see what the offer is and see what the market mix is of provision across the board in our places, so that we've got a better level of options to look at in terms of how do we want to shape those for the future? How does this work well for our residents? And how do we ensure that we bring all this intelligence together? We've been working alongside some of our colleagues around the voluntary sector infrastructure organisations as well recently to develop a pilot to look at the quality assurance aspect of it. So talking about the level of trust that we have, we know that our voluntary sector organisations are usually far better at understanding what is going on the ground than we are as local authority organisations, particularly at a county level. So we're asking them to undertake a pilot where they're supporting to quality assure the data, ensure it's up to date, provide us with a really good understanding of what is going on, how easy or challenging is it for these organisations to be able to provide us with the data, especially those that are very small organisations that don't necessarily have the resources to be able to do that. And additionally, we are looking at how do we gain additional benefits in the future around things like cost sharing with either district colleagues, NHS colleagues around some of the data infrastructure in the background, because we're seeing that actually it has benefits for all of us. So then that means that the overhead cost for us as an authority then becomes a more of a shared resource rather than just for one to foot the bill, if you will. Just to give you some numbers as well, what we've found up to now is that we've got around about over 350 providers who are inputting into our system at the minute to be able to provide that information. It generally is quality assured every 2 months. and it's updating over 4 different directory solutions, but with an accuracy that we're seeing so far of over 95%. And the feedback that we're getting up to now from the people using that is that it's really enhanced their ability to look at alternative options for support and better information and better guidance for them, as an alternative to just coming into statutory services, if you will. If you can just nip onto the next slide for me. And as I said, this is a journey. We are nowhere near finished in terms of our approach. And I've actually just got some really good ideas of where we might want to consider as well, just from hearing some of the previous speakers today. What we want to undertake is also looking at what are our future-proofing options around this. So where is the opportunities around sort of data scanning, things like Google, or looking at AI or other opportunities digitally to ensure that we're getting the relevant and right information in there. Also understanding that in a lot of cases, this QA approach, there is something around relationship management there with a lot of our organizations that we work with. So we want to ensure that we don't lose that with just looking at the technical aspects of the solution, and that we maintain that element of a personal relationship with that we currently have with that quality assurance. We're looking to introduce aspects around how do we get the elements of recording and monitoring who's accessing this information, what benefits are we getting from that information being shared more widely, is it having an impact, is it being used in the way that we expect it to, and how do we ensure that the aspects, particularly that are citizen facing, are fit for purpose, and that we've designed those in a way that people find useful and informative and are helping to them to make informed choices about what is going on in their area, and ensuring that they've got the right information and intelligence around that. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we are undertaking a bit of a review, because we are then looking at undertaking an organisational wide procurement of how we collect that data and how we push some of that information out across the organisation, which is a real fundamental step change for how we operate in the County Council currently. And we're also having discussions around how we do that in relationship with our NHS colleagues, and also looking at our district colleagues around how do we support our communities better in relation to housing and the relationship between housing and social care and housing and children's services. So the links with Savvy, I think, are something that we will definitely be looking into for the future. And one of the other aspects that we're just grappling a little bit with at the minute is around that sort of client level data, and ensuring that we're proportionate in terms of sharing that information, alongside ensuring that information and data security, so that we are getting the best out of it, but ensuring that we're not tying ourselves up in knots a little bit around the GDPR and the data security elements of it. So as I've said, from a Lancashire point of view, we are on the journey. We're finding that we are having both cost saving efficiencies, but we're also having some sort of non-cashable savings, but it's saving people time and giving them the opportunity to find the right information at the right time that is paying benefits to us as well. But we are still very much on a learning curve around it, and more than willing to work with any other organisations around supporting taking this forward in the future.
Does anybody have any questions for Victoria? Thank you for your presentation, Victoria, really helpful. Sorry,
I've had a cold as well, so apologies if I'm a little bit nasally.
That's okay. There's one from Peter here.
Yeah, so I think we are very much aware around increasing need, but what we're looking to do is we already have a high level of need identified in Lancashire, if I'm very honest. The challenge we get currently is that once people contact us, previously we didn't have the opportunity to divert to alternatives. So whilst we may be increasing need, we're going to be better informed around those needs and have better opportunities to ensure that the right services are there to support an individual or a household. So we're talking particularly around children's services, in a lot of instances, it's not just the child that needs a level of support, it's other people within that household as well. And at the least, what we're saying is, instead of having a fragmented approach of children's doing X, adults doing this over here, and maybe district councils around housing doing something separate over here, we've got that opportunity to do a much more coordinated approach around that. So I think we'll find that we may unlock a certain level of increased need, but I think that will plateau out as well over time.
Any further questions for Victoria? No, sounds like silence is golden. Probably going to move on to the team Q&A. Thank you, Victoria. Really appreciate your time for presenting to the team and to everybody else here. So there's some other members of the Open Referral UK Secretariat here. We've got Ian Singleton, who's a subject matter expert. Can you wave, Ian? Say hello. Put your camera on. Okay, Ian's been shy. We've got Mike Facker. Ian's here now. Mike, and also Adam, are you with us today? No, Adam isn't here. And also there is me. I'm a policy lead, which I didn't introduce myself earlier, policy lead in the local digital team in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So open to the floor for questions. Okay, Laura, do you want to read it aloud for the benefit of everybody else, as well as for the recording?
Certainly, Sheldon. So we were very fortunate to get lots of questions submitted in advance. So I will drop some of those in as well. And this first question is from somebody who's interested to hear how the team are increasing adoption in local authorities.
Super, thank you, Laura. I'm happy to get us started, Sheldon, if you like.
Okay.
So we've had a team, so some of the folks you can see on the screen here, but also colleagues from MHCLG's local digital team, and some other folks. So we've had some user researchers, service designers, content designers, and some software developers working on a project to do just this. So we're kind of looking at a number of threads. So we want to raise awareness. So that's the reason why there's a load of us here today, is to kind of tell stories, explain the work, hear about successful implementations and the challenges of doing this, and hear from colleagues across other kind of related bits of this kind of data landscape. We are building some assets and some artifacts, so things that can help. So for example, some tools to help people understand the potential impact of doing this in their place. So a kind of return on investment kind of calculator type approaches. Doing some work, speaking on behalf of a lot of the work that Adam's been doing. So doing some work to create a kind of business case template. So to support making the argument within organizations, to kind of show some of the common ways that people have approached that, how you structure that and tell that story in a way that your directors of technology and your directors of finance and so on will understand and support. As well as playbook. So again, examples, stories, step-by-steps of how to kind of approach implementing the standard, both at a technical level and an organizational level, and just kind of generally improving the information that's out there on the internet around the Open Referral UK standard. So there is a website there already, but we know it could do with a little bit of a spruce up and have some of the most recent kind of case studies added to it.
We have a further question from Simon Roberts. Do you have any examples or use cases of ORUK UK from Scotland where he can point to his colleagues at the local government improvement service? Mike?
Yes, I've been speaking with Chris Mackey from the Scottish Care Alliance. They have a system called ALIS, which complies with an earlier version of the standard. So Chris is interested in upgrading that to the latest version so the data can be shared in the same way as people in England who are adopting that. So watch this space, but it's definitely happening.
Yeah, and the other kind of contact we made recently, so Shona Nicol, who I believe heads up kind of data and infrastructure things at the Scottish Government, met with Greg Bloom, who's from the International Open Referral UK organisation as well. So they've had some very recent and interesting conversations about you know, how this applies to some of the things that are being looked at and thought about in Scotland.
We have another question here from Kate Cooper. If an individual in a council is interested in implementing open referral in their organisation, what are the very first steps that they should take?
I can jump in. So so I've done this a few times in a few different councils now, and I guess the place I would start is say there probably isn't one single right way. You know, our organisations are all different and complex, and have you know, you'll have different opportunities or different problems to solve. And I think really anchoring on, for me, anchoring on a very real and understood problem is the best way to kind of get yourself a foot in the door with this. So for examples, so your organization might be pushing really hard on a kind of big data strategy. So, you know, that's if you're in that kind of fortunate position where the organization's decided it wants to make a big investment in improving how it does data generally and putting in the infrastructure, the tools, the governance, the capabilities, then this is a lovely quick win for a data strategy program and team. And you can kind of get in at that big cross-organization, cross-place level. That's not always the case. What we normally see is that there'll be a very particular service need. And I've tried not to talk about directories of service too much because this isn't necessarily about directories of services, but those are things that are procured relatively regularly in local authorities and other organisations. So it might be a special education needs and disability team, a family information service, might be an adults information advice and guidance team, or folks working in those kind of similar spaces, you know, health and wellbeing services, who want to present out these lists of services so that people can kind of connect with those. So finding one of those that's maybe at a point of reprocurement, or a team is looking at how they might kind of better coordinate with other teams doing similar things within your organization, is quite often a good place to start, because somebody's likely already made a bit of an argument about we need to fund a thing, or we need to replace a thing, or I'm keen to develop something in this space. So kind of going in that way gives you a very real service interaction, some real users of services. And you can then start to say, well, if we're going to do this, why don't we do this well? And this is what well looks like. And this is how this could be the first step in a bigger thing, where we start to share and reuse this valuable data across the organization. So there's a kind of big strategy kind of down level, but I think also a take an opportunity where it presents itself, do it well and grow it is the other approach that's been successful. So those are kind of opinions based on having tried this in a few places. Others might have a different perspective.
Thanks, Ben. We have another question here from Andrew Macon. If I mispronounced that, sorry, Andrew. We've heard some good examples of returns on investment and how it can avoid costs. I wonder if you can give us an idea of what the upfront costs are likely to implement Open Referral UK. And he does qualify this by saying he will not hold us to the value.
I can give some examples of things in a different range. I think the so my caveats here would be there's a difference between, as I was just describing, solving for this in an individual service kind of area versus putting in infrastructure across a system. And those are obviously much bigger and different things, but kind of, you know, from small acorns, these kind of big trees grow, right? So some examples of how I've seen Open Referral UK starting to be used are at this individual service directory level, as an example. I have seen that done for as little as kind of £30,000 to £40,000 to kind of effectively procure a new software solution and to start to organize a team around how they properly kind of govern and curate the data that goes into that database in the back end, and one or more kind of different user experiences that start to feed that data. That gives you that, I guess, that very entry level, which is like it's maybe solving for one use case, but you've got data in a good structure, and you're able then through APIs to actually start to share it out with other other potential users. How that can then scale up and down though, right? So looking to kind of solve that across multiple teams, and kind of really extending how that data gets used. If you follow that thread, you can end up having much bigger conversations about, oh, hang on, we've got 4 or 5 teams who all seem to be collecting similar data here in our organization. What should we do about that? Now that's a very different conversation. That's not about buying software anymore. That's about how do we organize ourselves to look after and structure and serve data better. So it's a little bit artificial for me to say, oh, you can just buy this thing for this much money. Actually, what you're starting to talk about is having a bigger conversation about how you properly manage data in a place, which is a much longer term thing, has a different type of investment required. It may be reorganizing existing budgets rather than spending new money, but it is obviously it's a harder problem to solve. So sorry, I'm trying to give you some little hints at numbers, but it's very, very difficult to give an absolute like you can do it for this much. It's I guess it's more of a commitment to ways of working and ways of thinking about data as infrastructure in an organization and in a place.
Ben, we have another linked question from Peter Whitehouse. Does this include improvements to the back office functions, actual usage and payments?
So the better software solutions, I can't give too much of a strong opinion there as to which those might be, because that would be unfair to the many and various suppliers. But yes, most of these service offers come with the tooling you would need to help your teams input and curate data. And Vicky was talking about having like audit cycles, so checking that data has been reviewed on a regular basis. So quite often these products will come with the tooling to prompt people to check if the data has been looked at recently, if it's still accurate and true. They quite often also include ways for people to suggest, so citizens or the service providers themselves to suggest or improvements or updates to the data. So again, it's the tooling is the relatively straightforward bit. The kind of products can be very good these days. Is how you embed that into your systems, your services, your ways of working that is where probably the harder yards are.
Thank you. We have another question with Laura's submitted, which has been an advanced one. How can local government utilise this forum to influence up, and I think maybe to impress upon their decision makers what is the value of Open Referral UK? I think it's trying to gather a bit of momentum here first and getting people to understand what is the value of Open Referral UK. And as we move along, we'll be giving you some tools to help you do that as well. Adam's working on an impact case and a business case to do that, to advance it. And obviously, we'll get you to understand that a little bit better. Does anybody want to advance on that? No, well, watch out. There's going to be more stuff coming through. There's going to be things you can see how to validate this stuff, how to evaluate the cost benefits of this as well. And also there'll be some playbooks about how to work this through and how to implement Open Referral UK. So there's going to be some tools coming from us to help you do that as well. Any further questions? No? Okay. I think we'll move on to the next part. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, thank you so much for coming today, everybody. This has been really good engagement with loads of questions, and the team are here and happy to keep talking. And so yeah, one of the next events that will be useful for some of the folks here or some of your teams, your colleagues, is our kind of technical meeting that we'll be hosting on the 20th of November from 4 until 5:30. So this is very much, it kind of gets to the heart of some of the questions folks were asking just then, which is a little bit more like, how do you do this, right? What's the right technology to use? How do we start to think about implementing this within the systems or services that we have today? So we'll cover, broadly speaking, the work that we've been doing to increase adoption of the standard, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the relationships with other departments across government, so the links that this makes to some of those other technical programs that are happening. We'll talk about the International Open Referral Initiative, because it has its own technical steering group. So we do a lot of work to make sure that the ORUK standard stays kind of in sync with the international standard as well. There's a really nice feedback loop that happens there to make sure that the work we do improves the international standard, and any improvements on the international standard are also things that we can benefit from. And we can talk a bit about how the UK is represented there and what we do to make sure that we keep that working well. We can get into the weeds and much more about the specifics of the UK profile for the standard. We really avoided getting too deep beyond my very high level, this is what's in the standard kind of block chart. We can get into the weeds a little bit more. So this would be one probably for your technical colleagues, if you are not a technologist yourself, folks in your data teams, your IT teams, your maybe a category specialist in the procurement team if you've got upcoming procurements for some data infrastructure or some of these kind of directory services. We'll also give a bit of a preview of some work we're doing on a validator and a dashboard. So what the validator does is, if you successfully implement the standard, there is effectively a place on the internet that shows where this data lives. You pop that into the validator, and it quickly looks through that data and checks whether it is conforming to the standard. And if not, it will point out where, and that gives the teams who are responsible for it a good way to kind of check and debug and fix. And through that process, we're then able to keep a bit of a register of kind of known valid feeds of this data, this open data across the UK, which is ultimately kind of what we're driving towards, which is more people adopting it. The more we can show that others have done it, the stronger that feedback loop gets, and the bigger the community of people using, benefiting and learning and sharing that will come. So please, if it's not you, please do share this with your colleagues. There was a link in the chat. And yeah, it would be lovely to see them there on the 20th of November. And if you've got any outstanding kind of technical questions from today, like, let us know. We can try to answer those in the meantime. Otherwise, bring them along to the 20th, and we can kind of really get into the nuts and bolts of how this works. That's it from me. I think just the last couple of things. So Laura has shared in the chat a few times. We've got a feedback form. This is really important for us. I know it's not top of the list of things to do sometimes, but we've made it really quick, really punchy, really easy to do. If you can click that link, give us a little bit of feedback. This is our first kind of event we've done like this, so we'd love to know if we're hitting the right notes or not, what we can do to get better, make it more useful for you, so that we can kind of plan for any future rounds of things. Yeah, see, promise. Laura promises it's very quick to do. So please do hop on that link. It helps us out a lot, and we can keep making sure these things meet your needs. Back to you, Sheldon, I think.
Yeah, unless there's any further outstanding questions, I think we're going to call this to an end. But thank you, everybody, for coming to this. I really appreciate it, and hope it's of value to you. Any questions? Okay, I think we'll draw this session to an end. But yeah,